I'm still thinking about magical thinking, and specifically about those aspects of cognition which, if they apply to the real world, to the physical world, will be considered magical. And those are the connections that have been talked about by several of the users here. Drawing on phrases, Gordon Bow, to do with connections of contact, contagion, and connections of similarity. So two things that look alike have some kind of connection between them. Two things that have once been in contact with one another have got some kind of ongoing connection. That tends not to happen in the real world. It does happen a little bit in quantum physics, but we'll ignore that. But it doesn't happen in the real world. That's not how we tend to. If people start making those claims, we say they're paranoid, or we say they're thinking magically, or they're being superstitious, those kind of things. But we know that those things do exist to a certain extent in all of us. It's the less rational part of our mind, the more superstitious part of our mind. The thing that stops us cutting up family photographs if we do that, or all that kind of stuff to do with similarity and contact that I've talked about before, other people have talked about before. And one of the things I'm trying to get to is the value of that kind of thinking. Because I think, starting from P.W. Swivel's first video, which I thought was really great because it really laid out the table on this stuff, there's a sense in which, rational thinking, the ability to dismiss those kind of connections as irrelevant, in favour of connections which are predominantly causal, or at least physical, as being the only ones that are valid. Those belong as part of rational discourse. If I say, this event happens because it has this cause, that's considered to be a rational, quite rightly, that's considered to be a rational thing to say. If I say this thing happens because it looks a little bit similar to this other thing that's happening at the same time, then that's an irrational connection, quite rightly so. So I'm trying to, but that would be magical thinking. So I'm just trying to think of a defence for magical thinking, because not as it applies, as I say, to the physical world, but to the thinking processes. We don't think exclusively causally. Our brains are essentially causal, connectionist networks. The mind is a series of associative networks, at least large parts of it. But those associations, as I said in the previous video, are not causal. They're not part whole, neurological kind of connections. They do draw up on things like contagion and similarity. Those are some of the ways that our mind works. But I would be loath to think that those parts of our mind are irrational and therefore useless, because I don't think that's the case. Those are the parts of our mind which, all those processes, I would say, are kind of poetic, but I'm using that phrase advisedly from that field of study sometimes called cognitive poetics. But that set of processes which we think are as rational, they're a very small subset of all these other processes. And I don't want to think of those as useless, because they're absolutely essential to what makes us human beings. This is the kind of thing I think that Professor Anton was hinting at in his previous video. The capacity to see likenesses between dissimilar things. This thing looks like that thing. The capacity to make analogies and metaphors and similes and all that kind of analogical thinking is absolutely central to what makes us human, at the least, but also intelligent and conscious, I would suspect. At least conscious as we understand it. I'm not saying other animals don't have consciousness, but the kind of consciousness that we have, which is self-reflexive, which means that we recognise that it is something it is like to be. That's one of the ways that people describe consciousness. An entity is conscious if one can say there is something it is like to be that thing. Hence Thomas Nagel's quite well-known essay, What is it like to be a bat? Does it make any sense to say it's like something? Well, that likeness is the likeness of analogy, of similarity, of almost magical connection. Not magical in the physical world, of being able to make changes by an act of will, or that there really are these. Hi there. But there are these kind of connections.
Sorry?
I'm just talking. I'm just making a short video, mate. But there are those kind of connections, and that substrate of activity, analogical, metaphorical, drawing upon, contagion and similarity, is absolutely at the core of our being. I couldn't be using these words now and you couldn't be understanding them if all that vast hinterland of poetic, kind of magical thinking wasn't there. Just to repeat again though, that doesn't say the physical world like that. The physical world is largely causal. But the mind and our consciousness is not. Anyway, that'll do. Thank you very much.